Welcome to Code Ryder. So in this tutorial, we are going to study about data types and variables in Java. So let's start with data types. What are data types in Java? So in Java, the data types basically specify the kind of data a variable can store. And why do we need to specify the data type? Because with the help of data type, we can ensure that efficient memory allocation for that particular variable is done and proper execution of operations are followed. Okay. So say for example, if you want to store a very small integer value. So based on that, you can select a data type which supports a small integer value. There is no need to use a data type which takes a lot of memory since we are just storing the small values. So there are two categories of data types. One is primitive and the other one is non-primitive. So what are primitive data types? So these are the ones which are supported by Java. So you simply create a variable of a primitive data type. So in this example, int a is the name of the variable and int is a primitive data type. So there are certain primitive data types that Java supports. Okay, we'll cover all of those in this tutorial. But at a high level, we don't have to create an object for the primitive data types because these primitive data types are not classes. These are simply basic data types which are provided by Java. Coming to non-primitive data types, so these are the actual objects that we create for the classes, and those classes can be provided by Java or it can be a user-defined class. So consider this example, string a. So this string is a class which is provided by Java, and a is the variable which stores the string value. So these are the basic primitive data types that Java supports. So if you see from byte to double, all these are numeric data types. Okay, and you can see like for byte we have size 8 bits, and for short we have like 16-bit and so on. So all of these differ in kind of values they store. Some of them store integer values, some of them store decimal values as well, and on the top of that it also supports different ranges. So let's start with byte. So byte basically it has a default value of 0 and it can only store values from minus 128 to 127. Similarly, short, which occupies 16 bits, which is like double of byte, again its default value is 0 and it can have values from minus 32768 to 32767. So if you are planning to use an integer value which lies within this range, you can prefer short. But if you are planning to use a value which is like very small, say 5 or 10, you can simply go for byte data type. So similarly, you can see for int, long, we have certain ranges, which is like minus 2 raised to power 31 to 2 raised to power 31. And for long, it is slightly higher, minus 2 raised to power 63 to 2 raised to power 63. So all of them have a default value of 0. And if you see the size, it keeps on increasing as we go down the ladder. So for integer, it is 32 bits, and for long, it is 64 bits. Now coming to float and double. So with float and double, we can also store values which are in decimals. Okay. So that is the advantage of using float and double. And again, these have different ranges, which you can see here. Now coming to char primitive data type. The size of char data type is 16 bits and it can store any character at a time. So examples are like you can store an uppercase variable, you can store some special character, and you can also store some number. And these are defined in single quotes. The last one is Boolean. Boolean is the smallest variable you can say in terms of size. It just occupies 1 bit of memory, and the default value of a Boolean variable is false, and it can either store true or false. That's it. So what are non-primitive data types? We discussed earlier. So these are basically the objects of the class. Okay. So suppose you create a class car and then you create an object of it. So it will look like car, car, new car. So we have created the new object, which is like this car. Okay, so this is the variable or the object name, and this car is basically the data type of this variable. Similarly, we can have a string variable, which is again provided by Java. So this string class is provided by Java, and if we have string s, then again the data type is string, and the variable name is s. So this we have already discussed. Now coming to like what are variables? So variables are basically used to store some values, and each variable has three things: data type, name, and an initial value. So data type is absolutely important. The name of the variable is the identifier, and this is also required, and initial value is optional. Okay, so let's consider this example. We have a primitive variable a, because I'm calling it primitive because I'm using a primitive data type int. Okay, so int a is equal to 5. So this is the value that we are creating. So this is like optional. Uh, the value that I've set is 5. A is the name of the variable, and integer, as I told, int is basically a data type. Okay. So what are different types of variables? So we have three types of variables. One is local variable, then we have the instance variable, and then we have a static variable. So what is a local variable? The variables which are declared inside a method, constructor, or any block. Okay, so these are basically confined within method, constructor, or block. So any variable which is there inside these is a local variable. Coming to instance variable, instance variables are declared inside a class, but these are outside of any methods, constructor, or blocks. Okay, so these are instance variables. So static variable is something that we declare inside the class. It is similar to instance variable. The only difference is we just add a static keyword to it. Okay, and these are also called class level variables. So coming to the scope, as I told you, local variables are declared inside the method, constructor, or block. So their scope is limited to a method or constructor or block in which they are defined. It is not accessible outside. Okay, and instance variables, these are basically accessible for the objects that we create for a particular class. So say for example you have a car class. Okay, and inside that car class you have a variable int a, which is your instance variable. So if you create a new object of this car class, using that object you can also use the value of a, which is the instance variable. Okay, and coming to the static variable, so these static variables are shared across all the objects of the class. Okay, so suppose in instance variable, like we create two objects of car class. So each of these two objects will have or can have a different value of the instance variable, which is a. Okay, but if I talk about the static variables are basically shared across all the objects. So if we have two objects of a given class, those two objects will share the same copy of the static variable. Now coming to the default value. So starting with local variable, what is the default value of the local variable? So there is no default value in local variables. And if we have to define a local variable, we must also explicitly initialize it. Okay. And for instance variable have a default value that we discussed a little while earlier. So for certain primitive data types, for example integer or short or byte, the default value is 0, and so on. So instance variable have default values. So if we do not initialize them explicitly, it will be automatically initialized to a default value. Similarly, static variables are also automatically initialized to default value. Okay, so let's consider this class. We have a public class variable example. Okay, inside this public class we have three variables, and then inside variable example class we have a method public void demonstrate variables, and again here we have two more variables. So now starting with variable a, what kind of variable a is? since this variable a is defined inside the class, but it is not inside any constructor or method. So this a is nothing else but your instance variable. Okay. Now similarly, b is also not inside any method or constructor, but notice that we have a static word along with b. So this is your static variable. Okay. And then we have a demo variable, which is again an instance variable. The only difference is we have not initialized this demo. Okay. And here we saw that we have initialized a is equal to 10. And since we have not initialized this demo variable, so the default value would be taken, which is 0 for integer, since it is of type int. Okay. Then we have int c is equal to 30. So what kind of variable is this? This is a local variable. And why is it a local variable? Because it is defined inside demonstrate variables method. And then we have another local variable demo1, which is not initialized to anything. So if you see, the variable c is initialized with value 30, but local variable demo1 is not initialized. So will it have any default value? The answer is no, because there is no default value for the local variables. So if you try to use this demo1 variable anywhere, so it will give you an error because demo1 is not initialized. And since it's a local variable, initialization is mandatory if you have to use that variable. So I hope the data type and variable is clear to you, and how do we use it in Java, that is also clear to you. So if you like this video, please subscribe my channel Code Rider. Thanks for watching.